So the title of this video, as you saw, is that you waste years by not being able to waste hours. A direct quote from George Mack in the recent tweet that he posted, which I'll link in the description below. When I saw this tweet from George Mack, it reminded me of a year that I had in my business where I would say I wasted most of it. Not entirely. I learned some lessons, including the one I'm sharing now with you, but I wasn't able to step back and look at everything from a 30,000 foot view. I wasn't able to be strategic. I wasn't able to position myself well. And I just kept working on things and taking indiscriminate action. And it was largely ineffective. I worked on a lot of projects that failed that had I just stepped back and actually thought about what I was doing, I wouldn't have worked on them, or I would have worked on something else, or I would have done them in a different way. And that's what it means by you waste years by not being able to waste hours. It's not that you literally waste hours, it's that you have to have the time and freedom in your schedule to be able to think, to be able to strategize, and to be able to plan. Not overthink, not over-strategize, not over-plan, but simply position yourself better. So in this video, we're going to be diving into that topic. I'm calling it Working Hard in the Right Direction, a simple guide to leverage execution. And this will hopefully synthesize a lot of the stuff that I've talked about previously on the channel, as well as this idea of positioning yourself better. So there are three truths. The first is that you must work hard in whatever you do. Nothing happens without a base level of hard work. Charlie Munger says that you get what you deserve. And I think anyone would agree that whatever you're doing in life, whether you want to be an artist, an entrepreneur, you want to succeed in your corporate career, whatever it may be, you have to work hard. There is no way around that, right? So we all agree on that. But working hard is not the only thing that matters if you want to achieve above average results and rewards. And you can see this if you look at people who work extremely hard in particular jobs, say minimum wage jobs. They don't become rich, even though they work hard. And that's because of the position that they're in. In the knowledge economy, in the information economy, positioning, decision-making, and judgment, what you work on is a multiplier of the hard work you put in. You're going to work hard either way. And so you might as well play a game where you get higher returns on your effort, assuming you still enjoy the work. And there's a quote from Naval that sums it up. He says, work as hard as you can, even though who you work with and what you work on are more important than how you work. So to understand this a little bit better, I want to talk about something I call the pyramid of leverage execution. So first of all, you need to be able to consistently take action. One of the things that I struggled with years ago is that I had become complacent. I've talked about this before. I became lazy, and I was trying to be efficient and I was trying to position myself better, but I had lost the habit of being able to just diligently execute. And I needed to get that back before I could worry about positioning or being efficient or whatever. A lot of people jump to the middle part of this triangle, this pyramid. They think about how they can be, positioned better. They try and think strategically. They plan all the time. They avoid doing work because maybe it's not the optimal way to do things. All the while, they're not executing at all. And they're atrophying their focus muscle, their ability to do the work. And that's the base of the pyramid, right? That is the foundation of everything. If you cannot sit down and focus on something for 2 hours, whatever it may be, then you shouldn't be worrying about strategy or positioning or how to be more efficient. Right? Like if you sign up to the gym and you've never been before, you don't want to be thinking about what's the best workout plan, what's this, how do I be more efficient with my lifts, how do I tweak this little thing. It's like you just have to develop the habit of going, of showing up. So that's at the bottom, consistent action, your ability to do the work, your level of discipline and habit. Once you have established that foundation, not perfectly, but enough, you want to think about positioning, doing the right work. You can do the work. What's the best work that you can actually do? What's the best game you can play? Or what's a better game or a bigger game that you can play? And then once you've positioned yourself well, then efficiency comes into the picture. It's like, how do you go from 90% to 10%? So just as like a simple illustration, consistent action might get you to 50%, positioning gets you to 90, and then efficiency gets you to 100. But you shouldn't be worrying about efficiency if you haven't developed consistent action and positioning first. Now, I want to talk about the necessity of action and volume as a reminder. I've talked about it a lot before on the channel, but I don't want you to think that I'm saying, hey, you should forget taking action, like go and think about things. A lot of people need to just take action and volume. So, and it also feeds into positioning, which I'm going to explain. Being able to take action and execute on tasks is table stakes. If you're not yet able to do that, like you're a chronic procrastinator, then no amount of positioning or thinking about efficiency will help. You don't want to be the thinker who obsessively ponders, ruminates, strategizes, but doesn't do anything. This is worse than indiscriminate action taking, which at least gets you somewhere, right? And so you're better off being the person who just takes blind random action than being the person who obsessively overthinks and over strategizes, but never actually makes a single move. Action and volume give you the intuition, data, and judgment to better position yourself. Positioning without action is usually pure speculation. Taking action unblinds you to better options and paths. And that's why, in this very simple illustration, positioning sits on top of action. It's extremely hard to position yourself well if you haven't taken action in the past because you don't know what you don't know. If you've never started a business before, you've never run a business before, but you want to run one, you can spend all day, you can spend weeks, months thinking about the right business to start, but there's just so much that you don't know about yourself, about business, and reading books can only teach you so much. At some point, you have to take some action to get the data. You have to take action, you have to make mistakes, you have to learn the lessons that only you can learn. As a rule of thumb, I think I mentioned this, if you can't focus for more than 2 hours per day on a project and maintain your commitment to that project for multiple weeks, then you need to build your focus and commitment muscles before you start worrying about the second state of the pyramid, about positioning. So action alone is only one piece of the puzzle. We want to multiply it, right? So that each hour we work has a higher return on investment. And as a footnote, return on investment is personal. It might be financial, it might be work satisfaction, it might be something else entirely. You might not be motivated by the idea of making millions of dollars a year. You just want to do work that you're interested in. And so return on investment, ROI for you, is simply to do the work that you love, which is a form of leverage, in my opinion. The point is you want to play the best game that you can. So here's an example of what it means to position better. Let's say you want to build a web design business and you like coffee. You like going to cafes. You think, oh, well, I'll sell web design to cafes because I know cafes, I've got connections to baristas and so on and so on. The problem is that cafes, they only make so much money. And so you can only sell websites for a certain price point. And so you do all this work, you do 40 hours a week, and you make, a certain amount of money. But if you were to do the same work the same amount, maybe a little bit harder, but you sold those websites to law firms, you could probably charge twice the amount, maybe 3 times, for the same amount of work. And that's an example of better positioning. You're not changing the inputs, you're just changing the game that you're playing. And you end up selling websites to cafes when you don't give yourself the opportunity to waste hours, to step back and to think about things. So once we've got that consistent action piece down, we want to position ourselves better. We want to avoid indiscriminate lazy action because it's wasteful. It's a form of waste. We also want to avoid overthinking and over introspection, which is also wasteful, right? So blind action, on one hand, it might get you somewhere, but it's very ineffective. And then overthinking and over introspection is even more wasteful because you're not actually doing anything. One way to combat against both of these is to use the positioning feedback loop. Very simple. You start Again, this is assuming you've developed that foundation of consistent action. You know how to execute. You start by thinking. So actually stepping back, spending some time, depending on what it is, depending on how big the project or the goal is, it might be, a few hours, it might be a few days, it might be a few weeks. But you think through things. You write things down. You go for walks. Maybe you talk to people. You position yourself based on the best guess. And then you make a decision. Maybe you have multiple options to decide between. You make a decision, you make a firm commitment to a project, a goal, a deadline, or a milestone. Once you've done that, you take action. You execute without looking back until you're finished. And then you review. You look at the data that you've gained. You look at the lessons you've learned. Maybe you rest for a bit. And then you reposition. You move back to the thinking stage and you commit to the next best thing. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a solopreneur. You've got your own online business and you're wondering what to do next. You're working on a few projects and they don't seem to be going anywhere. And so you decide, I need to step back and I need to reposition myself. So you step back, you look at your entire business and you look at some of the data, you see that there's a bottleneck over here. Maybe you're not getting enough leads. It's not that you have a product problem, you're not getting enough leads in. And so you think, okay, the best thing I can do is work on something to solve that problem, right? Whereas before you were just kind of working on a bunch of different things indiscriminately. You're like, no, position myself better. I'm going to solve the lead gen problem. And so you make a decision, you find a project that you can work on to improve that. Perhaps it's make more content. You make a decision, you say, for the next 90 days, I'm going to make 90 pieces of content, something like that. And then you execute. And so you do that, you don't look back, you position yourself well, you execute, then you review. You look back at the 90 days, you go, okay, did I solve the lead gen problem? I solved like half of it. It's a little bit better, but I think I need to move in this direction. And so you position yourself again, or you reposition yourself, you develop a new project, design a new project, work on it, right? Working in sprints is very conducive to this feedback loop where you work, you kind of compress the amount of work into a short time frame, and then you rest and review, and then you repeat, because it allows you, or it forces you to step back systematically. What a lot of people do, and what I've done in the past, and it just hasn't worked well, is like you just keep working and working and working, and your thinking time or your time to like reposition and be strategic is like interspersed between that work. And to me, that just doesn't really work. Like it needs to be cut, clear, execution for a few weeks, step back, think. Execution, step back, reposition. Execution, and so on and so on. Naval talks about this too in his book, which I've got somewhere. He says like, work like a lion, sprint, eat, whatever, hunt, and then rest. As a knowledge worker, you don't need to be on like all the time. You're probably going to be more effective if you just like do the work, step back, do the work, step back. So that's the positioning feedback loop, but I want to focus particularly on the thinking piece. I've talked a lot about the taking action, the commitment. There's other videos on the channel about that. You can find them, but there's a few things I want to cover with the thinking piece, a few things that have helped me a lot and I'm continuing to focus on. The first is to have an investor mentality, sort of a meta frame for looking at your life, your business and so forth. This helps you escape tactical hell. Tactical hell being the constant, working in the weeds, in the trenches, so to speak. You're never coming up. You're never looking at what you're doing. You're never being strategic. And you just spin your wheels a lot. You're selling the websites to cafes. You're working hard. You're wondering why you're not getting rewarded for what you're doing. And so you want to look at your life like an investor. You want to view your time as a form of capital because it is. And if you were investing in companies, I know that some of you watching this channel are investors, so you know what I'm talking about. If you're an investor, you don't indiscriminately put all your money into something without thinking about it first. You'd be rational about it, right? You would consider the risk to reward potential. So having this investor mentality means asking yourself questions such as, what is my edge? What do I know well? What am I good at? How can I apply my talents and skills? What are the highest leverage, lowest risk opportunities in front of me? What's the opportunity cost of working on this project or this goal versus the others, right? If you're an investor, what's the opportunity cost of putting my money in this investment compared to perhaps a higher return one? At what point do I pivot if what I'm doing isn't working? What's my stop loss? When do I sell the stock? If I'm 3 months into this project and there's no sign of it working, is that the point at which I switch? Something to think about. How can I gain a higher degree of confidence to make the necessary decision? Do you need more data? Do you need more information? Probably not. You probably need more courage, but maybe it is information. I don't know. Figure out what it is that you need to make that commitment and move forward. So that's a helpful sort of meta frame that I have been using a lot just when I think about decisions and think about work projects. Next thing is the 10% rule, which is to allocate 10% of your time towards some sort of side project. This is helpful because even if it doesn't succeed, even if it doesn't go anywhere, it often brings fresh insights and ideas that you can apply to your main thing. It doesn't have to be a project. It could simply be working through a backlog of books you've wanted to read, but it should be something outside your main thing. What can quite often happen is that the thing you experiment with becomes the main thing, or it grows into something significant. This YouTube channel was like a 10% thing for me. I was just making videos on the side, one of them popped off, and then I decided to put more time into it. It is easy for this to turn into a distraction and kill your focus. So you do need to be disciplined about it. If that 10% starts becoming a 50%, and it shouldn't become a 50%, like your main thing's starting to struggle and you're not giving it enough attention, then you just have to be wary about that. Now, the final piece on thinking, or the final tip, is to actually dedicate yourself to thinking time. 1 hour of thinking time once per week. Pen and paper only, no distractions. Consider how your life would improve if you did this. If you actually sat down, like you went to a coffee shop or whatever, went to a park and you just sat down for an hour with pen and paper and you thought through what you needed to think through. I guarantee if you did that, you would find way more clarity. You'd be able to position yourself better, and you would probably overthink less because you're actually thinking more. As I've mentioned, overthinking is not a form of thinking. It's simply reaction. There's nothing strategic or systematic about it. But if you sit down and you have this on your calendar and you're like, this is thinking time. I'm going to think through this problem in my business or in my relationship or whatever it may be. You just write things out. You just think through it. And it can be hard. But if you do that, you are going to position yourself better. So a few questions and prompts. Why am I working on this? Why are you working on what you're working on? Have you ever asked that question? How could I do what I'm doing with 50% of the time investment but maintain the same output? See, this is one of those questions that like people just don't ask. There's probably something in your workflow that is taking up so much time that you could just entirely eliminate or systemize. How could I achieve my 10-year goal in 6 months? Peter Thiel's famous question. It's not that you can necessarily achieve your 10-year goal in 6 months, but by forcing yourself to think through this question, you might find new ways of doing things, or you might find a better position. You might find a way to sell your websites to law firms instead of cafes. In what way am I avoiding the obvious move? Sometimes it's not that we need to be strategic, it's simply that we need to not ignore the thing that's facing us that's a little bit uncomfortable. Am I staying busy to avoid the courageous decision I need to make? How much of my work activities are really moving the needle? What could I stop today without any significant impact on the outcomes of what I'm doing? So you could spend an hour on like one of these questions, right? And if you did that, you'd probably come away with a lot of clarity and you'd be a lot better positioned. So I want to end this video with 3 principles from George Mack, who again inspired this topic. The busier you are, the more time you need to set aside to reorient. This is the paradox of work. Bringing a Victorian factory worker mindset to the age of infinite leverage is like bringing boxing gloves to a drone war. If you're just putting in 40 to 60 hour weeks indiscriminately without thinking about your leverage points, about how you can position better, then that is not effective at all. The output of clear thinking has never been higher in human history. The output of being busy has never been lower in human history. Some of the most effective people I know are not necessarily the hardest workers. They simply position themselves well, they make good decisions, and they find leverage points. They know what they know, and they know what they don't know. They know what they're great at, and they know what they're only mediocre at. And they avoid the mediocre, they focus on the great, and they might only work a few hours per day, but they get outsized returns because their ability to think and position and execute on what actually matters is elite. So that is it for this video. I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, hit like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.